My name is Mary, and I'm 45 years old. I live with my husband Richard, who is the same age. We met in college and started dating soon after. My first impression of Richard was that he was serious and honest. Though a man of few words, he deeply cared about his family. I was drawn to Richard's kindness and knew I wanted to spend my life with him. Luckily, Richard felt the same way. We even promised to marry each other while still in college. Despite some calling it young love, we continued dating after graduation, and once we began our careers, we decided to get married. To our delight, we had a child shortly after getting married. Our daughter, Sarah, who was turning 21 this year, graduated from vocational school and has started working. Her workplace is close enough to commute from home, but she wanted to live on her own, so she now lives near her job. With Sarah moved out, Richard and I have been enjoying life, just the two of us, for the first time in a while. Life was pretty good, but there was one thing that bothered us: the presence of my sister-in-law, Susan. Susan, who is 38, divorced William last year after being married for 15 years. The reason for the divorce was Susan's infidelity. Despite appearing like an average woman, Susan has a weakness for men and had cheated on William multiple times during their marriage. William had seemingly turned a blind eye, but eventually he couldn't bear it anymore. He collected evidence of her affairs and confronted her with divorce papers through lawyers. Susan didn't have a chance. William even demanded a large sum of alimony from Susan's lover, David, which led to the divorce. What surprised me the most was what happened next. Unbelievably, Susan decided to remarry, this time with David. We found out about her remarriage when we received the wedding invitation. Knowing about Susan's infidelity was messing with my head. Susan, are you really going through with this wedding? Everyone knows about your affair with David. Are you sure about this? Richard, who has always doted on Susan, thinks her remarrying David is cause for celebration. But I couldn't help thinking about William, who got cheated on. Poor guy. And Susan has even more issues to deal with, issues that would soon come crashing down on us. One day, Richard got a call from Susan. Yeah, what? Are you okay? We can't tell what's going on over the phone. Come over now. Richard sounded frantic. After hanging up, he looked deeply concerned. Susan was crying on the phone and seemed too distraught to explain, so I invited her over. Richard's serious expression told me this wasn't something to take lightly. I felt uneasy, wondering what could have happened to Susan, who was supposed to be getting married in 2 months. About an hour after hanging up, Susan arrived at our place, sweating bullets. You could tell she was really stressed out. Welcome, come on in, Richard said. Mary, help me. As soon as she entered the house, it was clear Susan was panicking. Hey, calm down, Richard said, seeing the frantic Susan on the sofa and offering her some coffee. Susan gulped down the coffee and let out a deep sigh, trying to calm herself. What's got you so worked up? I asked. As I looked into Susan's face, she started to break down in tears. Richard, shocked, rushed to console her. It's okay. Can you tell us what is going on? Yeah, okay, Susan said. After shedding some tears, she drank another cup of coffee before she started talking. The thing is, I need your advice about the upcoming wedding. Wait, are you canceling the wedding? Why on earth would you do that? Richard interrupted. No, that's not it. Well, it's not it, Susan stammered. What are you trying to say? Richard asked. It seemed like Susan was trying to figure out how to explain. She hung her head and remained silent for a while. You have to tell us or we can't help. If there's something we can do, we will, Richard encouraged. Susan finally spoke the truth. The truth is, I may not be able to afford the wedding and the honeymoon. What? I was flabbergasted. All that panic, and she was worried about money? Richard turned to Susan. So let me get this straight, you're saying the wedding and the trip might be off because you can't secure the funds. Yeah, Susan replied. You work, don't you? And doesn't David have any savings? It's not that we don't have any, Susan explained. It's just that we spent it all on our divorces. We had to pay William alimony, so we can't afford the wedding or the trip. I was at a loss for words, incredulous that Susan would speak so casually about such a foolish decision. So the point of discussion is, we were hoping to borrow the money for the wedding and a trip from you two, she continued. Richard listened to Susan and furrowed his brow. Clearly, he found this whole situation ridiculous as well. After a sigh, he spoke. Oh, is that all? Well, we have some savings. We can lend you that much. What? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're lending it to them. Of course it would be heartless to refuse Susan, right? He continued. You don't have to pay us back. He added, turning to me, Mary, you said you have been saving for our parents' care, right? We can lend them the money from that. Richard proposed to lend them money from my savings, not his. No, that money is for my parents. I can't just give it away. Susan broke down crying again, and Richard rushed to comfort her. What's wrong with you, not helping Susan in a time like this? How much do you need, Susan? It's $30,000 total. $30,000? My parents are already over 75. Though they're still healthy, they will need care soon. Being an only child, I had been saving for this purpose. Even after having children, I never quit my job and have saved up money alongside educational funds. I had no desire to use this money for Susan. We'll be using Mary's $30,000 savings for Susan's wedding and honeymoon, Richard stated. I told you, that money is for my parents' care. I continued to adamantly refuse. Richard finally lost his temper. Not helping Susan is crazy. Those who have should give. Then why don't you give it? I retorted. I bought this house. I don't have savings. The house was bought with both our salaries and on a mortgage. That's no reason. What about Sarah's educational expenses? I pressed. We split that too. And by the way, we have split all living expenses so far. Did you forget? At a loss for words, Richard clenched his fists, his face beat red. I suddenly realized that Richard hadn't been saving any money at all. We had been keeping our finances separate since we got married, so I had no idea. Just give me the money, no questions asked. If you don't get it, then forget it. Richard spat out those words and stormed off to his room. I was left alone with Susan in the living room, not knowing what to do. Mary, do we really have to go without the money? Susan looked at me with teary eyes, but that wouldn't work on me. Sorry, you'll have to figure it out yourselves, I said, avoiding further conversation to keep things from getting more complicated. An awkward silence filled the room. Susan seemed to be waiting for me to give in, showing no signs of leaving. After some time, Richard finally emerged from his room holding a piece of paper. I printed out divorce papers. If you won't help Susan financially, then let's divorce. I've already signed them. It's up to you now, Mary. Richard was out of breath, clearly riled up. If we divorce, you will lose this house, Mary. You think a 45-year-old divorcee can easily find a place to live? Richard was looking down on me, confident I wouldn't go through with it. Seeing Richard's arrogance and Susan's irresponsibility, something inside me snapped. You want a divorce because I won't give Susan money? Don't be ridiculous. Enough of making a fool out of me. I snatched the divorce papers from Richard. I'll go through with the divorce. Why don't you pay Susan the $30,000 since you love her so much? My yelling left Richard frozen in surprise. Ignoring him, I quickly packed essentials and left the house. I had nowhere to go, but I took a chance and called Sarah. Hello? Hey, how are you? Luckily, Sarah picked up right away. Rare to get a call from you. What's up? Well, I had a big fight with Richard. If it's not too much trouble, can I stay at your place for the night? Of course, stay as long as you like. Oh, could you make some of your buffalo chicken wings? It's been a while. Sarah loves the buffalo chicken wings I make. Thanks, I'll make a ton of them. I headed to the supermarket to buy ingredients and then drove to Sarah's apartment. After a 30-minute drive, I arrived at Sarah's place. As I started cooking in the kitchen, Sarah awkwardly approached me from behind. What did Dad say to make you consider leaving home? Not wanting to worry Sarah, I replied vaguely. Well, just some stuff. Did? Oh, Mom noticed something. I froze at Sarah's words. What are you talking about? Never mind. Sarah quickly looked away, flustered. I had an instinct that I needed to know what Sarah was getting at. Actually, I've been thinking about divorcing Dad. He said some awful things. Do you know something about it too? The moment the word divorce left my mouth, Sarah's eyes widened. She started talking like a dam had burst. Finally, it's out. Dad is having an affair. I saw him going into a hotel with a younger woman. It made my skin crawl. And that's why I moved out. Sarah's revelation was beyond surprising. I couldn't believe what she was saying and was stunned. An affair? Huh. Wait, it wasn't about that. Sarah's face turned pale. She realized she had spoken impulsively. It wasn't about that. But it sounds like something I should know. Can you tell me more? I'm not going to get any more hurt at this point. Well, if Mom says it's okay, I'll talk. Sarah took a seat and started talking about Richard's infidelity. Just before I graduated, I saw Dad when I was out with friends at a pub. He was walking with a woman I didn't recognize, so I followed them. Sarah had goosebumps on her arms. Seeing your own father's infidelity is not something anyone would want to witness. Her revulsion was understandable. Do you have any proof? Yeah, I was so disgusted and angry. I took photos of Dad entering the hotel. When Sarah showed me the pictures, there was Richard, arm in arm with a much younger, beautiful woman. Wow, that's really unsettling. I'm sorry I didn't catch on sooner. Sarah shook her head. Actually, I was blackmailed for money by Susan. When I refused, Richard told me to divorce him. If I have this kind of evidence, I'll be the one filing for divorce. Sarah had been keeping this from me all along. She must have been going through a lot. I felt terrible now that I understood why Sarah had moved out. Could you send me those pictures? I have the divorce papers signed by Richard. I'll make sure to get alimony before the divorce is finalized. I'll go with you. I want to give Dad a piece of my mind one last time. Feeling empowered knowing Sarah was on my side, I finally grasped the full picture. It turns out Richard wasn't blaming Susan for her affair because he was cheating too. The moment I realized that, my disdain for him grew exponentially. That night, we drowned our sorrows in a heap of buffalo chicken wings and a good deal of venting about Richard. Far from being upset, Sarah seemed almost pleased at the idea of Richard no longer being in our lives. Then the weekend rolled around and Sarah and I went over to where Richard was staying. So you have finally come back, he sneered. We returned to find our home in shambles. Richard, never one for housework, hadn't bothered to clean or cook. Half-eaten instant noodles and snack wrappers were strewn all over the place. We're back, but what a mess. How can anyone live like this? Sarah said, visibly annoyed. How dare you talk to your parent like that? Richard snapped. Well, you won't be my parent much longer, will you? Sarah shot back, even more irritated. I have already told Sarah I have filled out the divorce papers. All that's left is to file them, I stated firmly. You really think you can actually divorce me? Richard challenged. I do, but first, there's something I need to confirm with you, I said. Richard, Sarah, and I sat down on the sofa. The table in front of us was dirty, which only made me feel more uncomfortable. Confirm what? Take a look at this. I showed Richard a picture Sarah had sent me. As he looked at the screen on my phone, his face went white. This is, he stammered. The picture showed Richard entering a hotel with another woman, leaving no room for excuses. That woman works for me. She wasn't feeling well, and we were just taking a break. You're not going to assume this is cheating, are you? Richard tried to wiggle his way out with a lame excuse. Assume? I took the photo right before you entered the hotel. She was laughing and didn't seem sick to me, Sarah said. I'll give you the divorce you want, but you will have to pay the alimony decided in court, I declared. I can't afford to pay alimony. I have to give money to Susan too, Richard protested. My disappointment in Richard, who was still prioritizing Susan even now, reached new heights. Then work hard to afford both. From now on, we'll talk through lawyers, so don't contact us again. I don't need a cheating dad. Please get out of my sight, Sarah added. We were just about to leave the house when we heard Richard's desperate plea. Wait, you've got it all wrong. Please wait. He came chasing after us. Think about it, Mary. If we get divorced, you're going to lose the house, right? You would just be causing yourself trouble. I felt not an ounce of love for Richard, who couldn't even muster an apology to the very end. It's your punishment for planning to use my money on Susan and for belittling me. I don't need this house. Mom, you can stay at my apartment for a while, Sarah said. Leaving a teary-eyed Richard behind, we walked out of the house. Oh, what a relief, I sighed. Me too, Sarah agreed. The thought that we wouldn't have to deal with Richard and Susan anymore lifted our spirits. Eventually, I was able to finalize the divorce thanks to Sarah capturing those incriminating photos. I also secured a decent settlement in court. Broke and penniless, Richard could no longer provide for Susan. As a result, Susan and David were unable to get married. They didn't just stop there. They broke off their engagement after constant fights about money. Susan blamed her inability to remarry on Richard. Infatuated with Susan, Richard felt responsible, and they now live together. However, due to paying me the settlement, Richard is also broke. In the end, they moved in with their parents, but I had already filled them in on the situation, so they got kicked out. People should learn not to depend on money and start living on their own. As for me, I decided to move back into my parents' home with Sarah. Fortunately, both of my parents are still healthy, so I used my saved caregiving funds to renovate our family home. The fully renovated house is incredibly comfortable, and both my parents and Sarah are thrilled. I plan to keep working hard to maintain a simple yet fulfilling life.